Hey there, listeners. Well, here we are, episode 700. It's just amazing just how under 5 years ago we started this podcast, and today we're releasing episode 700. I know I see a lot of people trying to start podcasts and they don't know what to do, just like me. I didn't know what to do, but then I went and learnt from the best in the world. And then the other thing is that you stick at it. The key word here is consistency. Not only for this podcast, but also in leadership and anything that you do in life. It comes down to the commitment, the discipline, the focus, but the key word being consistency. So I was thinking about who I could bring on to this episode to celebrate episode 700. And there's one guy I thought about. But before I introduce you to the guest for episode 700, I want to say thank you to you as a listener who has been listening to this podcast. Thank you for the messages that people send me from around the world on what they're getting out of it, how they're enjoying it, but also how they're sharing it with others. Here's something I'd love you to do. I'd love you to go on, if you listen to it on Apple, go to Apple and hit the 5-star rating and leave me a review, please. It helps the podcast impact and also visibility. And the second thing is if you listen to it on Spotify, go to Spotify and you can put a 5-star rating, but you can't leave a review at this stage. So I'd love you to go ahead and do that. But also I'd love you to go ahead and share this podcast with your network, with your family and friends who should be listening to these episodes. So my guest is a guy called Sean Willard, who is based in South Africa. A great friend of mine, and it was just like two mates getting together and connecting on the podcast. And Sean has shared some really fantastic stuff in relation to leadership and so forth. He talks about contagious leadership. He also talks about things like the dream, the struggle, and the victory. But I'm talking about being authentic leaders, leading from inside out. The concept that he shares around that will blow your mind, but also he starts to talk about, towards the end, about busting pots. Now, what does he mean by that? Well, I'm going to leave that to you to find out when you listen to the episode. So, welcome to episode 700. I look forward to sharing a whole lot more episodes with you. So, it's now time for you to also celebrate episode 700 and listen to the interview with Sean Willard. Enjoy.
Welcome to Leadership is Changing. Each week, we and our guests provide information and insights through exploring leading change. This is taking your leadership to another level by finding the balance between executive excellence and personal well-being through stories that inspire real change. It's time to adapt in our fast-moving world when leadership is changing with your host, Denis Gianoutsos.
Hey there, listeners. Welcome to another wonderful episode of the Leadership is Changing podcast. Great to have you here with us. Wow, episode 700. It's awesome to have you here with me and my special guest for this episode. I've been thinking about it for a while, about who would be the right person to have on this episode with me. And it's my very good friend based in South Africa. His name is Sean Willard. Sean, a massive welcome to you.
Dennis, thank you so much for having me on. And man, I tell you what, if there's ever a leader out there who shows persistence and consistency, it is Dennis. Finally, I'm on. Oh man, I wanted to be on since episode number 1. So thank you so much for having me. It's a privilege to be here. And yeah, just lovely to be on with you and all your guests.
Wonderful.
Awesome. Now, Sean, should we not talk about rugby today?
Come on, let's do it.
So listeners, this is really two mates on each side of the world. We are born just a few days apart from each other, and we met several years ago, and we'll talk about that in a minute, but it's two mates here having a conversation about leadership and about change and so forth. And Sean, I've already said South Africa, but whereabouts in South Africa are you?
Yeah, so currently we stay in a little place called Franschhoek. It's really the gastronomical capital of South Africa, I like to say it. Probably about an hour, Dennis, outside of Cape Town. for those of you who know South Africa, Cape Town's, funny enough, just been voted as the #1 destination in the world by Time Out in terms of, I think, restaurants and eating and staying, etc. So a lot of people know Cape Town, but we're in the wineland, so about an hour outside of Cape Town. We've been here, Michelle and I, now with our kids for over 20, almost 23 years now, Denis. So we love it down here in the Western Cape. And of course, our rugby team is the Stormers down here.
You've got the Stormers, and we've got, well, where I'm based in Auckland is the, what do you call it? The Blues. That's what they're called. But I don't support them. I'm a Hurricane supporter from Wellington. So the Storm and the Hurricanes, still a storm, and just a different type one. Yeah. Hey, I've given the listeners a little bit of an introduction to you in the pre-recording, but you're an entrepreneur, pharmacist, an author, you're a speaker, you're a coach, a disc trainer, but also of late, you're the founder and CEO of an organization called Barley Milk. And it's just, I love watching your journey, Sean, and where you've gone from to what you're doing today. Tell us more about your background.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. It's really a bit of a kaleidoscope, isn't it? I mean, it's never boring in the Willard household, let me tell you that. And if you look at my personality type, you'll know why. But yeah, I started out in pharmacy back in the late 80s, Dan. And when I qualified, I went into retail pharmacy, all forms of retail pharmacy as a manager and then as a partner, and finally owned my own business here in the beautiful village of Franschhoek up until about 2008. And then over that period of time, I went through a number of what I think are significant. Sometimes I say it's a midlife, but it didn't buy the Harley Davidson to find a new wife. I went through that time of just challenging myself to think what was my purpose and a deeper meaning to life. And eventually sold my pharmacy in 2008 to live out that purpose. And that's when I went into more of a entrepreneurial side of things. And we're talking leadership today. That's really, I think, where my leadership journey started for me after my initial life attack. But where we are right now in terms of the last 3 years, on this beautiful journey. And well done, Denis, for saying, "Mwah," just like the chef's kiss, because a lot of people battle with that expression. But we started a company called Moi, and it's really it's the plant-based milk company. And boy, oh boy, is it a journey of learning and growing. But we can share more about that as we go.
I was just in a cafe this afternoon preparing for this conversation, and a friend of ours who owns a cafe says to me, "Oh, is this product here yet?" And I'm like, no, not in New Zealand yet. But
Dude, I like that.
Yeah. But we'll see where it goes. Now, an author of a book. What's the book?
Yeah, so the first book that I wrote, Jen, was called Have a Life Attack. And it really came out of my own personal experience where I had an asthma attack at 5 o'clock on one Friday morning back in 2008. I'd just done a speaking function the evening before. We're staying over at some extended family of ours and went to sleep. Everything was absolutely normal. Never had an issue in my life before. And at 5 o'clock the next morning, I literally found myself, I'm standing on the side next to the bed at 5 o'clock, pitch black, and I'm going like making the sound almost like the barracuda when you got your swimming pool and it's coming up for air and it's gobbling. And I just could not breathe. I couldn't breathe. And it was, the scariest thing I've ever gone through, because my family ran through. They looked at me. I looked at them. We knew there was trouble. And there was absolutely nothing. It was almost like someone had held the other side of a straw and then said, "Okay, Dan, just suck through there now." And it wasn't kind of like 1, 2, 3, let's take a breath and suck. I woke up with no breath. So to cut a long story short, I survived that episode. But I literally sat on the side of the bed that afternoon, and I just said to myself, "Sean, have you really lived? Have you really loved? And have you really laughed? Have you enjoyed the journey?" And I just said, "No." I'm getting goosebumps as I'm sharing this with you. And I do every single time, Dennis, because I know that a lot of people out there, your listeners out there right now, that might be in that same space of their life. Please, God, don't let them have to ever go through a medical emergency or thing. But how often isn't that the case in our life, right? When things go wrong, you've had your challenge. And I mean, I'm just, what an incredible story for yourself. I mean, that life-changing moment. So that's where the name came from, because people often say, "Sean, have a life attack. What do you mean?" And I just want to tell you one quick story. Just funny. I met Les Brown back in 2010, 2011. And he said to me, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm writing a book." He said, "What's the book?" I said, "Have a Life Attack." And of course, being from South Africa and New Zealand, we hear that life attack quite easily. But in America, that sounds like have a laugh attack. So he grabbed me and he recorded a video, I kid you not, for 5 minutes where somebody said, "Record me." And he talked about having a laugh attack and how important it was to have a laugh attack in life. Well, it's important to do that as well, but it's all about having a life attack.
Tremendous book. Sean, I remember as you talked about my journey and going through the tumor on my left vocal cord and that, and I will never, and I keep saying this to you, I'll never forget the conversation you and I had. And I've actually shared it on an episode before with our listeners. But that thing that you said to me one day really helped me shift a lot of things for me. And that was, Dan, do not die with the music still in you. And when you said, and I still get goosebumps when I'm saying it, right? And that's you saying to me, you've got a lot to offer, and there's a lot of people out there that need to hear what you've got, but don't die with it in you. In other words, you've got to live that life and live with it. And that was one of the catalysts for leaving my role to go and start this business. And I just always think about you and how you said that to me, and I'm so grateful that you did. But that's what friends are for, to really give that message to the other person, to really help them.
Absolutely, Dan. Yeah. Privileged, and I'm so grateful that you've come through so strong and you're doing so well.
Yeah.
That's great.
Thanks, man. Did you say there was another book?
Well, I did a combination of I love doing quotes then, and so I put 52 quotes together, like a weekly with Willard. So it was just another book like that, yeah. And I'm working in the background on my third one, and I think it's really a combination of what we might just talk a little bit about today in terms of leadership and just changes, etc. But yeah, because it's quite a different journey, but we'll talk more about that.
Excellent. So let's get straight into it, and then we're talking about leadership itself. How did you actually get into leadership yourself?
And it's interesting. First of all, let's define leadership, right? So for the listeners that are on your podcast, they know leadership well. But I think for those that might come onto the class going forward, for ourselves, is that thing of leadership is influence, and we influence people by adding value. But I think it's important to know that all of us do influence in some way or another. So let's say leadership is influence in a positive direction. That's the way we see it. Influence it, because there are a lot of people out there that lead in organizations, and I use air quotes for those that are obviously listening, lead in inverted commas, but they're influencing people maybe in a very negative way. Maybe they're driving them, they're forcing them, they're manipulating them, and this happens obviously. So for me, I had to define what was leadership for me right from the get-go, and how I really got going on it was interesting, because we talked about John Maxwell, I think a little earlier, and that's where we met each other. But back in 2009, I'm in a conference in Dallas, Texas, in this, I think it's a 5,000 or 10,000 seater. I'm sitting there, like, seriously, I was like a little kid in a candy shop, bouncing off the chair with my video camera in hand, because I'm watching this guy on stage. And in a way, he's speaking foreign, because I just didn't understand that language. And yet something resonated with me in my heart. Like I could almost feel like this is what I need. This is what I need. He was saying things like, everything rises and falls on leadership. And I was going like, yes, yes. Meanwhile, right over the top of my head, I didn't know what he was meaning. And it was only as I got into it over time. So when you say, when did it happen? I think that was a kind of a moment for me in 2009, but possibly even later, I only really got to understand what leadership was all about. John had a significant part in that.
Yeah. And for those listeners who don't know who John Maxwell is, he's a gentleman who's written probably about 80 to 90 books, speaks about leadership, speaks about teams, a great guy. Check him out. What I found about John when I started to learn from him 30 years ago is the simplicity, the way that he talks about leadership. So many guys, or people, I should say, write books on leadership and things like that, and it's so technical, and I go like, what? But with him, it was simple. And I think that's the part about being influential as a leader, is you put it in a way that people can relate to things, for sure.
100%. I love the way he says, put the cookies on the bottom shelf. Just to put them on the bottom shelf. And I think it takes a genius to make something that's very complicated very simple. And that's it. That's what I love about Sean.
Yeah. And Sean, with your experience and around leadership, and because we're known as what we call as part of John Maxwell's team, that we were the founders, as they call us. In other words, we were one of the first ones to join his team, and that's where you and I met in Florida, West Palm Beach. And I remember you and I meeting for the first time, getting to know each other as well, which is great. How important is it for leaders to ensure that they are around other leaders who are successful or like-minded? How important is it for leaders to be networking all the time?
I think it's absolutely essential. And then I remember there was a guy called, I think it's Charlie Tremendous Jones, that talked about, we'll be exactly where we are 5 years from today. It's been quoted by Zig Ziglar and Jim Rohn and others, but he was the original guy that said, we'll be exactly where we are 5 years from today, barring the people we associate with. Those days, he said, the tapes we listen to, and what we listen to, what we read, and who we associate with. So I think those three are almost like the triune. And we kind of like, when we're hanging out with people, that's one form of direct touch when it comes to leaders. And there's something contagious about it. Then, I mean, you were there in August of 2011. In fact, you were the very first group. We were the group that ran parallel to you just after that as part of the founder circle. But what an atmosphere it was when you walked into the room. You could almost touch it. You could almost touch it. Yeah, the motivation, the inspiration, etc. And for me, what it did is it just raised my whole level. It raised my level of belief about what was possible. Yeah, for me as a little guy from a little village in Africa, going all the way over to West Palm Beach, meeting these incredible gurus and people, and I say that again with just inverted commas, but people that I really looked up to and respected, and realizing, man, they're just like me. They're just flesh and blood. They go through everything that I go through, the failures, the mistakes, and the challenges, but they have a story. It's the dream, the struggle, the victory, and it is so important to hang around with those kind of people. It raises your vision. It just raises your level of leadership to a whole new level.
Is that a terminology that the South African rugby team use? The dream, the struggle, and the victory?
It could well be. I'm not sure. I've heard it said so often before, but certainly I think they've lived that.
Yeah, I think most high performers, most people who are out there, entrepreneurs nowadays, leaders, they go through that, right? We do dream.
Yeah.
There is the struggle there, and then there's the victory. It's those who actually stay on that path and are committed, but also the discipline, the focus, and that consistency. If they're doing it, that's what's going to really help them get there where they need to go. Sean, your favorite leader. Now, this person could be alive or from history. Who's your favorite leader and why?
I think I've had to pick two that I would talk about John, just purely because, and the why from that perspective would be the authenticity. John, when I finished up at West Palm Beach and we were flying out, I was at the airport and a young lady was overheard two now Maxwell certified coaches talking, myself and another lady. And we were chatting a little about John. And she overheard it. She came past her. She said, John Maxwell. And she just said to me, give me one word right now to describe John Maxwell. And I said, authentic. I said, that's it. And for me, authenticity is so important because especially in today's world, and we'll talk again a little bit more about this maybe later, but in today's world where AI is becoming the thing, people are looking for real. People are looking for real, man. They're not looking for somebody up on a pedestal that sounds all wonderful and wax lyrical, but, kicks the dog and beats the wife. They're looking for authentic people that are real people, but are good people at heart, people of integrity. And I think he wraps it up as integrity, authenticity, and that all in there. And then obviously, because I'm a man of faith, as John would say, I'm a man of faith. So Jesus is another obvious example for me because he epitomizes love. And I don't know if you've ever read that book by Joel Mamby called Love Works. It's a brilliant book. It talks about 7 characteristics of effective leadership. And it's called Love Works. And I believe love works.
Good. There you go, listeners. If you haven't already checked out that book, there's another one that Sean's just shared as well. Love Works by John Lambie. Is that the right way?
No, Joel Mamby, Mamby. Yeah.
Mamby, yes. It's a bit like a life attack, but it's Mamby, not Lambie. Yes.
Where we go.
There we go. Very good. Hey, so you choose John Maxwell or Jesus. You choose one of the two of them. The question I want to ask you, if you're on a park bench sitting with one of them, having a coffee, what would be one question you'd love to ask them?
It would probably be about my own personal struggle with regard to living life from the inside out as opposed to outside in. And I would probably want them to give me a comment about how to live, as in lead, from the inside out. I'd love to hear their perspective. Now, let me just put a bit of clarity and perspective to this thing. For so many years, Denis, I was living life from the outside in. So I was in that situation of drive, almost like the purpose-driven life. I don't like the purpose-driven life. I think he did an amazing thing. I don't want to be driven. I'm giving up on the hustle, the hassle, the hardships, the fighting, all of those kinds of things. I want to live life from the inside out. And so I've been on this journey now, probably solidly now for the last 3 or 4 years, where I am trying to live and lead from the inside out, both in my family and in my organization. And if I was sitting with John right now, I'd say, John, how can I become a more effective leader leading from the inside out? In other words, leading from a place of peace and rest and hope. I want to live a life of meaning every single day of my life. I don't want to have a vision and a dream for my life as a leader or as an organization and think, When I hit the million, then I've made it. When I've gone to New Zealand, then I'll be happy. No, 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 no. I want to lead that now. So how do I lead now effectively and from a deep sense of meaning before I've accomplished that? How's he done that? Because I said that I'd ask either one of those people. I'd love to know their perspective. I know my thoughts on it, but I'd certainly like to know their perspective.
I think that is spot on what you just said, because I think there are so many leaders out there today who are trying to be something else that they're not. One thing. Two is that they're not even living from inside out. It's the other way around, as you said. It's the bonuses, it's the golden handcuffs, it's that kind of stuff too. And it's not really helping them. It's not even being a sense of purpose for them. And so they're missing it. Now, a lot of their staff are leaving because they don't feel that meaning of purpose or that sense of purpose, even the understanding about how they're contributing. So they don't want to know. And so they are voting with their feet. So I think it's very important. It's a great question. I would love to know the answer. Hey, can we organize that, eh? So that'd be pretty cool. Yeah. Yeah. Hey, Sean, the show is called Leadership is Changing. When I say that title or that statement, what does it mean for you?
I think it follows up on that, Den, very well, because I feel, again, and I think you said for you, so let me just say that for me, maybe not be for all the listeners right now, is I'm challenging myself all the time. Maslow said either step forward into growth or backward into safety. So every single day of my life, I challenge myself to think, Sean, how can you change, not just for the sake of changing, because you're going to change, change is inevitable, but how can you change in a positive direction to lead better out there? And I think the key thing for me where leadership is changing is the whole thing of living life from the inside out and being transparent. Here's the thing, Dan. Most of the people that I've come across in my life over the last, and I've worked in big organizations, pharmaceutical companies, nutraceutical companies, et cetera, et cetera. Most people almost admire and ooh and ah at people who have got the glitz and the glamour. You talked about the golden cufflinks and the corner office, et cetera, et cetera. That does not interest me anymore in my life. So when I say leadership is changing for me, it's just that those things aren't important to me. I don't know if they should ever have been important, but they were important. Let's admit it. You're starting out, you're a youngster in life, you want to have the nice car, you want to have the nice house, you want to do this, you want to do that. And all of those things are external to me. Where I'm at in my life, especially post 2008, and I think you can probably share it from your story as well, I've gone within. I've said, at the end of the day is, am I leading well inside of me? Am I leading from that place? And I tell you, Dan, I was training John Maxwell's laws on the laws of leadership back in 2011. I was driving on the way to an organization. By the way, listeners, John's got a book called The 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership. It's a no-brainer. Just read it. You'll thank me later. But one of those laws is the law of the picture. People do what people see. And I was driving on the way to this organization to go train these executives. And I actually had to pull over on the side of the road and phone my wife. And I had to say, sweetie, forgive me, because I'm not leading well. I'm not leading well at home. When I look at my kids lying on the couch, it's because, hello, I'm lying on the couch, or I'm doing this. And so therefore, I'm a mirror. I'm a picture to them, or I'm a picture to you, sweetie. Forgive me. I want to lead better. So when I say that leadership is changing and want to do it from the inside out, it's not just pie in the sky when you die by and by. It's steak on your plate while you wait. It really is, for me, on a day-to-day basis, leading well at home first, with my wife, with your partner, with whoever it is in your life, leading well with your kids. And then, yes, leading well in organizations. I think there are too many leaders out there that hold positions of authority or leadership, but honestly, if you start scratching below the surface, they're going after the external rather than living from a place of inside out. And I've got to tell you, Dan, it's a road less traveled. It's a road less traveled. In fact, there's very few people that I've seen on that journey. I feel like sometimes I'm a little bit of alone on it. Bristles and bites, because it's counterintuitive. It's counterintuitive to everything I learned about leadership really up until that point. It's, just, I don't know how you feel, Dan, but really at the end of the day, for me, so much of what I was taught is about the outside in, not about the inside out, not about the person who you really are. Love, trust, all that kind of stuff, respect.
And I think John's other books are like Becoming a Leader that he talks about. And I think that's part of becoming a leader, because you're maturing and you have a confidence to actually challenge the outside stuff rather than and having the challenge or the courage to actually take on the inside stuff. I think is really important. And the inside stuff, when we talk about that, what do we mean by that? I know you're talking about like for family, but is it more mental? Is it more about pride? What is it?
I think it comes down to purpose. I think that's the key thing, is where am I working from? I have a quote, John, about purpose that says, living my purpose isn't about where I work at. It's about where I work from. It's an inside job. Now, the funny thing is this. These quotes come to me in times. And honestly, sometimes when I read my own quotes, I don't understand them. I really mean it. It took me, I wrote that quote, put it in my book of quotes, and only a few years later did I look at that quote and actually realize this is what I was talking about. Living life from the inside out. Now, let me give you a practical example about this. I had given up pharmacy, I'd resigned, well, not resigned, I had sold my pharmacy, I'd gone into speaking, coaching, training. Then I had to do a full walk around in the wilderness and go back into pharmacy, work in a pharmacy as a responsible pharmacist. They call them RPs here, whatever. The last thing I ever wanted to do was find myself back in pharmacy after having given up that thing, thinking that's the end of that story for me. And then in that space and place, find my purpose. No, see, most people are looking for their purpose in another job. But here's the secret. Wherever you go, you take yourself with you. Wherever you go. And when there's no enemy within, the enemy without can do you no harm. So when you're sitting in that place and you're all disgruntled about this and that and the boss and the burn, and you feel like you're not living your purpose, let me ask you something. Is that because of the circumstances around you, i.e. outside in? Or are you responsible, because that's what you are, responsible, to live your life and your purpose in that space? Now, that is leading. For me, that is leading. When circumstances are dire and difficult around me, I choose to live from the inside out and to create a difference. Be the change that you want to see in the world.
Oh, man, you just took the words right out of my mouth. That was the quote I was going to say to you just then. And that is, be the change that you want to see in the world, for sure. Because it's easy for you to sit back and moan and groan and be upset with things like that, but do something about it. And if you're not happy with the leadership within your organization, do something about it. Become the leader, or go and do something else. Yeah.
100%. And I think that's an important point, is when you think of employees, and I know that's something we were going to chat about, is employees see themselves as followers. It's just like, that's the way I'm thinking. You're the leader, you're the manager, and I'm the follower. No. An employee is as much a leader as anybody, because who's the person that we're leading the most? It's me. And who's at the scene of the crime 100% of the time? It's me. My attitude starts there. So if I lead myself well from the inside out, and here's the thing, Dennis, it's a choice. It's a choice that I wake up with every morning to say, let me have an attitude of gratitude. Let me go out there and really live my life from the inside out. Then that's the change. Because people will turn to you and say, no, but I can't change it. I'm not in the boardroom, then. I'm not in the C-suite. I can't do that. No, lead you. Are you leading at 5 to 5 because you want to get home quickly, and are you stealing all the office pencils because you think that you deserve them? I mean, little things like that we joked about it. But at the end of the day, the attitude starts within, and then the action goes from there.
The attitude starts within. Love it. Hey, you mentioned employees. I'm going to come back to another question in a minute, but the employee side, if we stay with that, has the employees' expectations of leaders changed of late?
I think so. I think the internet is just an interesting thing. There's so many positive and negatives on it, but I think what's happening is that people are beginning to see through the BS. I think in the olden days, you wouldn't have noticed that as much, so you wouldn't have been exposed to much. But I think what we were seeing, fake news and this and that and all the rest of it, sometimes I think it's a good thing in a way, Dennis, because what we really want in terms of leadership, we know that trust is built on 3 things. It's built on competence, connection or communication, and character, of course. Character is the most important. So people are looking to follow leaders of character. Obviously, in other words, they must be a person of character first, and they're looking for it. And they've seen through the facades, the thing. And I think in our world that's rapidly changing, I mean, I just laughed this week because ChatGPT was taken over in terms of its popularity by DeepSeek, and I think someone else took over from DeepSeek within a day or something ridiculous. It's a rapidly changing world, but there's something solid about people of character, people of integrity, people of honesty, and people are looking for that. And I honestly think, and I speak to everybody out there, not just people who are in sort of leadership things. I think there's a gap in the market. There's a gap in the market for people being real. It doesn't mean that you always pour out your heart and give everybody the whole story, etc. But it just means being transparent, being honest about your weaknesses and your failures, and then sharing that story as an encouragement to others. And I think that's where things have changed in terms of employees.
Yeah, good points there. And you know how you just talked about things seem to be getting faster. Technology seems to be driving a lot of it, whether it be data, business, whatever it is. A leader to be successful nowadays in that fast-paced, ever-changing world, what are your thoughts on maybe some things they need to be aware of or do, in addition to what you've already shared about being successful as a leader?
Yeah, and let's just define success again. Let's to quote John. We quote him, John, a lot, but I loved it when he was out in South Africa and had a chat, and he said, "Success is when the people that know you the best love and trust you the most." Isn't that beautiful? When the people that know you the best love and trust you the most, and I think that is something that I aspire to, both in my family, but also in my organization. Again, you can fool some of the people all the time, all the people some of the time, and not all the people all the time. So for people to be successful, we're not talking about money and fame and all the glitz and glim and all the rest of it. I think, again, if you can come home at the end of the day, Den, and sit in at home with your wife and say, I've led well. I've got that sense of peace and whatever, then you've done it well. If you've had to whip people up into a frenzy at work and all the rest of it, then you haven't led well.
Yeah, very much so. I actually find that a lot of leaders use names or they put pressure because of timelines and things like that. And I go, actually, you know what? You're not a heart surgeon, so no one's going to die right now. So and don't get me wrong, there are some businesses that are life and death situations. I get that, but majority aren't. And so it's what kind of pressure we're putting on people. Then there's the other side where I actually see that these people are actually quite lazy. And so what are we doing to try and do things? And some leaders say to me, oh, I'm there to motivate people. And I go, no, you're not. And they go, what do you mean? You should hire motivated people, but you are there to inspire them to go to new levels and do things like that. That's what our role is. And that's what a leader needs to do, to be able to stay with the pace and to do things as well by actually inspiring yourself first and then others.
Yes. Yeah. And I think if from a leadership perspective, the clearer the vision, if without a vision, people perish, right? So the clearer the vision, write it down, make sure that you articulate it well, and make that vision even inspirational. Make it something that, again, is, and yet it comes down to this whole thing of purpose and meaning, because people want something that makes a difference. So take whatever your vision is for your company and make sure that it incorporates a deeper sense and a deeper meaning, because then you and I sit around the corporate tables. We've been in those meetings where it's all about the bottom line. The bottom line for me is a byproduct of living that inspirational life, inspiring people. What inspires people is you. And I know that money doesn't inspire people for longer than 2 ticks to give them a raise. And next month they're back at your door. So please, sir, can I have some more? It doesn't, it's got to be an internal dynamic. And I know, I know that I'm seeing from the same hint sheet all the time here, but I'm saying is, when you're living life from the inside out, that's the difference.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So in 5 years' time, if we get you to start thinking about the future and things like that, where do you see leadership being in 5 years?
Yes, I wish I had that crystal ball. And I was just thinking it's like, where will I be? Sean, where will you be in 5 years' time as a person in terms of your growth and all the rest of it?
Great question, Sean. Great question. No, it's right.
I definitely am on this journey for myself. And I think wherever I go in terms of inspiring people, it's going to be about bringing people to a place of living from a place of meaning and purpose. Then I think for me, I think that's going to be the rest of my life. That's my mission. I said on a recent podcast that people often ask me, Sean, you talk about purpose all the time. So what is your purpose? And I say, I bust pots. And then, of course, usually they look at me like a deer stuck in the headlight. Like, what are you talking about? Muhammad Yunus used the sort of analogy from the Green Bank. He said that there's no difference between the seed of a normal tree and the seed of a bonsai tree. It's the pot that curtails the growth. Where we take a seed of a normal tree and a bonsai tree, it could be the identical seeds. But if you put one in the right environment where it can grow, it's got all the nutrients, it's got everything else, etc., and it's got space to grow, great. But what we generally do in our life, both as maybe as parents, as people we have well-meaning hearts, but we put people in and we want to protect them. We don't want them to fail. We don't want them to be hurt, etc., etc. So we grow up with these kind of limiting beliefs, self-sabotaging things that are happening in our lives. And we think, well, let's just be safe. Let's just be safe. Let me put myself in a pot. Or someone puts you in a pot and says, you could never do that. How would you ever do that then? How would you start a podcast and do 700 episodes? Are you mad? Someone else has done that. Leadership is changing. No, it's been done. No, you could never do that. And then we start to put ourselves in the pot. Yeah, I could never do that. But someone came along maybe Sean's little statement, there's someone else's statement, and then Den's life-changing experience, and it busts your pot. And you said, no, why am I here? Boom, and your roots went out. Your dead banks got spread. And for me, if I had to look at the next 5 years, for myself and for organizations, I'd like to see them spread out their tent pegs, bust pots for people. In other words, the leaders in organizations need themselves to have their pots bust. And that's where you come in, Dan, with all of these people around the world. You're doing that right now, releasing them into their potential, and then helping to mentor. Because this is the thing is, at the end of my book in the Life Attack, I talk about a mentoring movement. Then help the people in your organizations to bust their pots. Someone said, but what if I train them and then they leave? Well, what's worse than that? What if I don't train them and they stay? Mentor them, bust their pots, and let's start a leadership revolution.
I love that. Bust their pots and start a leadership revolution. Wow, that's pretty cool. Sean, been a real pleasure talking with you today. If our listeners are wanting to get hold of you, where should they go?
Then I'm all over on the internet, but primarily on my website, and that is www.smswillard.com. That is like the cell phone SMS, smswillard.com. Obviously, there's LinkedIn, YouTube. I do some videos and podcasts on there as well. And welcome to reach out and connect. I'd love to connect with your listeners.
Excellent. We're going to put that in the show notes, listeners, so then you can check out or connect with Sean. But Sean, once again, thank you so much for joining me. It's been a real pleasure.
Den, listen, I just want to say, you are such a mate. We've had so many banters around rugby, and I wish we had another hour to really just chat about it, because I think there's so many leadership lessons, and maybe we'll do that one day in the future. Folks, for those of you who have listened to 700 episodes, when I say, I'm saying this from our heart to you, is this: you have the most incredible guy leading this podcast. Stay close. As someone said, when I sweat, you get wet. Just stay close to Dan, and you will learn and grow to the next level in terms of your leadership. Get him for your next conference.
Thank you, Sean. So cool. So there you go, listeners. Well, it's about contagious leadership. See, Sean's the kind of guy you want to be around and want to listen to. But it's about how you help influence. And that's what leadership is about. So remember this: being authentic. People are looking for real leaders today. So if you can live and lead from the inside out, that's a great start. It's the attitude that starts within you, and it's about being a leader of character. Hey, how many pots are you going to go out and bust today? And that'd be a fantastic thing as well. There you go, listeners. Well, that's it for today. It's always a pleasure being with you. Thanks for joining me on the Leadership is Changing podcast. Until next time, bye for now.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Leadership is Changing with your host, Denis Gianoutsos. Each week, we and our guests provide information and insights through exploring leading change, inspiring executives and leaders to adapt and lead a bigger game in a fast-moving world.